Welcome to the Day 2 Luncheon at Arctic Encounter. Up first, I would like to quickly recognize two very important sponsors to us, two gold-level sponsors, and it's important to note every single time I can up here that this whole event is truly not possible without the contributions from our sponsors. Thanks to GCI and Tote, we are really proud to partner with them. GCI being a leader in this state for connecting Alaskans with telephone, internet, and other services, and of course Tote working hard no matter where people live to try to provide them with the goods and the cargo that they need. So up next, I'd like to welcome the Lieutenant Governor of the state of Alaska, Miss Nancy Dahlstrom, to the stage for a welcome.
Good afternoon. It's great to be here with you. You know, we've been learning new words today and yesterday, and I don't have a new word to teach you, but I do have some trivia I want to share with you. 153 years ago today, on March 30th, the U.S. Secretary of State William H. Seward signed a treaty with Russia for the purchase of Alaska for $7 million. Can you believe it? $7 million. Despite the bargain price of roughly 2 cents an acre, the purchase was ridiculed in Congress, and a press said it was Seward's folly or Seward's icebox or President Andrew Johnson's polar bear garden. Nevertheless, the treaty was ratified. So I just wanted to share that with you. We in Alaska are grateful that that happened. We love our state, and we believe that we are the greatest state in the nation. Building the relationships between neighbors and those who traverse the Arctic is vital to ensure that this new Arctic does not leave anyone behind, especially our indigenous people of the Arctic. We all envision an Arctic that is first and foremost healthy, and an Arctic that is protected. We in this room have a lot in common. The commonalities form a foundation for clear, reasoned policies that will set the course for the responsible development that does need to occur. Working together, we can facilitate outcomes that are not just in our best interest as Arctic nations, but are in the best interest of the entire world. The Arctic is Alaska's economic future. And as Alaskans, we insist on an equal and meaningful voice in managing our backyard. Once again, I'd like to welcome all of our Arctic neighbors and guests to Alaska and thank our event organizers for all the hard work putting this together. And I'd also like to introduce our next speaker. It's an honor to be able to do this. Next, we are going to hear from the University of Alaska President Pat Pitney. The University of Alaska Board of Regents appointed Pat Pitney as the university system's 17th president on February 25th of 2022. She had served as the interim president since August 1st of 2020. Prior to that, President Pitney served as the state's director of the Division of Legislative Finance. She was the former Chancellor of Administration at the University of Alaska Fairbanks, and she worked at the University of Alaska statewide for 17 years. In all, Pat's 23 years with the University of Alaska before leaving to serve as the state's director in the Office of Management and Budget in the administration of our former governor, Bill Walker. Pat moved to Fairbanks in 1987 from Billings, Montana, and she earned her MBA from University of Fairbanks and an engineering physics degree from Murray State University in Kentucky. She has 3 adult children and 3 grandchildren. All 3 of her children are UA graduates, and this is interesting with degrees from UAF, UAA, and UAS, so they spread the wealth everywhere. Something very interesting about Pat, and I don't know if we have others in the room that fit in this category, but before moving to Alaska in 1984, Pat was a United States Olympic team member, and she won a gold medal in the women's air rifle. I think that's pretty darn cool. So please join me in welcoming President Pat Pitney.
Thank you, Lieutenant Governor Dahlstrom, and good afternoon. I would think that every once in a while I could get away without that fact, but it follows me. As president of UA, I'm honored to lead the only public university system situated in America's Arctic. It's a privilege to address all of you, and congratulations, Rachel and Jackson, and the rest of the Arctic Encounters team for putting on this event. Alaska, and by extension, the University of Alaska, occupies a critical position at the international crossroads of the Arctic. Here, logistics and transportation, remote energy production, and national security converge with indigenous heritage, sustainability, and climate change. The University of Alaska recognizes the significance of this position. We continue to support and sponsor the Arctic Encounters Symposium because we firmly believe that solutions to the Arctic challenges require collaboration and cooperation. And I'm proud to say the extraordinary research and leadership that we provide in the Arctic throughout the University of Alaska system has global impact on those challenges. Arctic emphasis is embedded in almost all of our programs across the system. At the University of Alaska Anchorage, at the Institute of Social and Economic Research, we are quantifying the costs of adaptation and mitigation in our shifting climate. It's crucial information for our policymakers to understand the ramifications of their decisions. The University of Alaska Southeast is uniquely situated. It's in a rainforest with a glacier out the back door, the Pacific Ocean out the front door, and a freshwater lake next door. Our students see and study the immediate, nuanced shifts in that ecosystem. Their research suggests that the melting glacier runoff may actually help support salmon resilience and salmon runs in the future. UAS is the most beautiful university for students to study sensitive environments. Our flagship university, Arctic Research University, University of Alaska Fairbanks, is the nation's leader in Arctic research and among the top in the world. From impacts of permafrost thaw, unmanned aircraft monitoring of Arctic infrastructure, fisheries and ocean sciences, complete with the nation's only ice-capable research vessel, to robust climate modeling. All of these are embedded with indigenous knowledge and respect for the communities we serve. UAF is a global destination for cutting-edge Arctic research. I would like to acknowledge just a few of the people who showcase our Arctic expertise. They did their training within our university system and are now branching out, sharing their wisdom and making a difference nationally and globally. We're proud to have these Alaskans in roles as leading voices, and we're proud UA was part of their formation. There's Larry Hinsman, UAF Vice Chancellor former UAF Vice Chancellor for Research and an engineering professor. He's now serving in the White House as the Executive Director of the Interagency Arctic Research Policy Committee. Last night he says, "Pat, use me. You got a guy in the White House." Thank you, Larry. Fulbright scholar Erin Whitney and her former team at the Alaska Center for Energy and Power played a pivotal role gathering data that will inform industrial scale power generation, transmission, and transportation. She's now the director of the Arctic Energy Office at the U.S. Department of Energy. Thank you, Erin. And a longtime friend and colleague, I want to acknowledge Mike Sfraga. He earned his PhD from UAF, and we worked side by side for many years. In his more formative days, Mike climbed Denali and authored a book about Bradford Washburn, the man responsible for the defining photography of that mountain. Now, Mike is undertaking another climb, this time to the heights of Arctic diplomacy, as he prepares for his confirmation hearings as our nation's first Arctic ambassador. I cannot think of a better person for this job. Mike, last year you introduced us to the Arctic 7 Seas. I'd like to add an eighth, a C for congratulations from all of us. Okay. To systematically develop future leaders like Mike, Larry, Aaron, and many others, we've kicked off a planning process for UA's Arctic Leadership Program. If you're on our external steering committee, would you please stand up? I know there's a few people in the room that are on our Arctic steering committee. We have a few others. All right. Thank you. UA's Arctic Leadership Program will give students and early career professionals the foundation they need to become leaders and influencers, building and strengthening their national and global networks. It will catalyze the training and inquiry for that next generation of Arctic leaders. And I know we'll see the participants of this program filling our seats in symposiums like this when we all step aside and let the next generation take over. If you were ever a student, if you were faculty or you are staff at one of our 3 universities or throughout the university system, could you please stand? Thank you. As you can see, there are many UA experts in the Arctic space who will be central to developing our future leaders. As an added advantage, our students and faculty have been building networks across the Arctic for decades, probably more than 5, more than 10 decades. We're 100 years old. But this is through international science work, as well as the University of the Arctic. UArctic is a consortium of over 200 circumpolar north universities and research institutions. They're all focused on improving our collective Arctic future. I'm pleased to be on the UArctic board, and I really appreciate Diane Hirschberg's work. She's with ICER at UAA for her leadership role in that organization. But I want us to intentionally build leaders who are Arctic prepared, whether they be engineers, policymakers, climate scientists, mayors, governors, White House staff, or the future Arctic ambassador. They'll all have a depth of Arctic understanding and a network to influence Alaska's global future. The University of Alaska system is proud to be at the forefront of Arctic issues. We have extraordinary Arctic programs. We live in it, we research it, and we teach it every day. If you want to study the Arctic, work in the Arctic, or research the Arctic, UA's 3 universities are where it's at. We're honored to be part of the global Arctic community and look forward to continued partnerships and collaborations. Thank you so much. Good, you didn't make me.
Thank you, Pat. Please join me in welcoming another very special person to the stage, and I'm going to embarrass him really quickly. Randy Churchkey is a known leader to many of you, especially veterans and active duty military service members in the room. And actually, with that in mind, can we please give a round of applause, noting we're going to have security discussions up here today for all of our active duty service members and our veterans. Can you please stand? Thank you for everything that you do for Alaskans and for the country. Randy Churchkey runs the Ted Stevens Security Center. He can share more about that, and you're hearing from him throughout the conference. But I just wanted to say on a personal note, Church, as everybody calls him, is also a good friend. He's kind of like a father figure to a lot of us who have hearts in the right place, but are civilians. And we may not always understand these like extremely nuanced decisions for stage placement regarding protocol and rank and how to do the right thing, not offend anyone, but most importantly, to build the right kind of dialogue to meet the right ends and include the right voices. And we all know that national security is certainly not the only important topic in the Arctic space or at any Arctic conference, but it is certainly critical, especially in this time with our geopolitics. Church is a top-notch leader, and we're really lucky to have him in Alaska, especially in the ways in which he services the Department of Defense and supports their role here in Alaska. And I'm happy to welcome him to the stage now. Thank you, Church.
Thank you very much, Rachel. Well, it's a privilege to be here again this year for Arctic Encounter. And Rachel, you and your team and Jackson, you're the task force of goodness for everything you've been able to do, building this event to make the world-class event it is. And I'm just so thankful that you made the decision to transition it from Seattle to Anchorage. Well done. Yeah, that's worthy of applause. It's my privilege to introduce to you a remarkable human being who's serving our country in remarkable ways. This is the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Homeland Defense and Hemispheric Affairs, the Honorable Melissa G. Dalton. Secretary Dalton was sworn in as the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Homeland Defense and Hemispheric Affairs on the 4th of March, 2022. She is responsible for advising the Secretary of Defense and senior defense leaders on defense continuity and mission assurance, homeland defense and defense support of civil authorities, Arctic and global resilience, and U.S. defense and security policy for Canada, Mexico, Central America, the Caribbean, and South America. That's like a task force of responsibilities bestowed upon a single human being. Prior to being sworn in as the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Homeland Defense and Hemispheric Affairs, she served as the Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Strategy, Plans, and Capabilities. Prior to that, Ms. Dalton was a Senior Fellow and Deputy Director of the Center for Strategic and International Studies International Security Program, as well as Director of the Cooperative Defense Project. Prior to joining CSIS in 2014, Ms. Dalton served for a decade as a career civil servant in both the Bush and Obama administrations of the Department of Defense. Her assignments included Senior Advisor for Force Planning, Special Assistant to the Secretary of Defense for Policy, Policy Advisor to the Commander of the International Security Assistance Force in Kabul, Afghanistan, and Country Director for Lebanon and Syria in the Office of the Undersecretary of Defense for Policy. She has also served as an intelligence analyst at the Defense Intelligence Agency. Ms. Dalton holds a BA in Foreign Affairs from the University of Virginia and a master's in international relations from the Johns Hopkins University School of Advanced International Studies. She is a member of the Council on Foreign Relations and was a Council on Foreign Relations International Affairs Fellow. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a remarkable leader who has remarkable responsibilities for defending our nation and ensuring the security, collaboration, cooperation of our allies and partners across this hemisphere. It is a joy and privilege to welcome the Honorable Melissa Dalton to the stage to give you some reflections from her vantage point. Please give her a warm welcome. Madam Secretary.
Well, thank you so much, Church, for the truly kind introduction. And we can only accomplish our mission every day in the Department of Defense with a great team, which we are very lucky to have, and having great teammates here in Anchorage in the Ted Stevens Center under Church's leadership. I want to thank Arctic Encounter founder Rachel Callender and the rest of the Arctic Encounter team for inviting me to speak here today with all of you. I see that we're looking forward to terrific sessions ranging from Indigenous leadership and critical minerals to private capital and climate change. The breadth of these topics highlight what a dynamic region the Arctic really is. I'm truly delighted to be here. This is my first trip to Alaska. And as someone who loves the outdoors and is always taking my family on different camping and hiking trips, Alaska's natural beauty is truly unbelievable. And a trip to Denali is definitely on the to-do list for us. At the Department of Defense, the National Defense Strategy is our North Star. And in that document, the defense of the homeland is DoD's top priority. As the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Homeland Defense and Hemispheric Affairs, my team and I work every day to support that top priority and ensure that we are doing all we can to defend the homeland. Doing so means developing homeland defense policy, overseeing what the department calls mission assurance, and focusing on regional issues all across the Western Hemisphere. Let me unpack for you what that means. The department stands ready to defend the United States and ensure our security. I am sure you have heard Secretary Austin characterize the People's Republic of China as DoD's pacing challenge, and is expected to remain our most consequential strategic competitor for the coming decades. Russia poses an acute threat, demonstrated by its ongoing war against Ukraine, while North Korea, Iran, and violent extremist organizations remain persistent threats. So what are we doing to defend America against the PRC challenge and these threats? One of my top priorities is working binationally with our Canadian allies through the North American Aerospace Defense Command, or NORAD, to deter aggression and to defend North America from airborne and maritime threats. And we've seen that cooperation with our Canadian ally over the past several weeks in the recent shoot-down of China's high-altitude balloon. But it also means leading the department in other activities, like the protection of key domestic infrastructure, networks, and assets to ensure we have the military capabilities we need to project power and support our warfighters. During my time in the 49th state, I've had the chance to see some of that key infrastructure and personnel. As an example, this past Tuesday, I visited Eielson Air Force Base, Fort Greely, and Clear Space Station, where I saw not only the 354th Fighter Wing, the farthest north fighter wing in the United States Air Force, but also our missile warning and space surveillance assets, including the latest generation long-range discrimination radar. Just yesterday, I had the privilege of visiting Joint Elmendorf-Richardson, which houses the Ted Stevens Center, the department's newest regional center, and the first specifically focused on the Arctic. Again, I want to thank General Churchkey and his team at the Ted Stevens Center for their expertise, and I look forward to the security-focused workshops, conferences, and Arctic-focused training events that they'll be leading in the coming years. I'm also grateful for the Ted Stevens Center organizing an Arctic Allies snowshoe trip up to the Arctic Valley Trail yesterday, building a shared appreciation amongst allies for the Arctic's natural beauty, and also developing our allied snowshoe interoperability. Regarding the Arctic, Alaska is the reason that the United States can call ourselves an Arctic nation. With our like-minded Arctic allies and partners, and alongside other U.S. departments and agencies, we seek an Arctic region that is peaceful, stable, prosperous, and cooperative. Because the Arctic encompasses the northernmost approach to the United States, it is critical to the defense of our homeland. With climate change affecting the Arctic at 3 to 4 times the rate of the rest of the world, an increasingly accessible Arctic increases the region's economic, diplomatic, and military importance. Today, the PRC is increasingly active and assertive in the region, while simultaneously Russia is strengthening its presence here by refurbishing old infrastructure and building new bases. And Russia's war on Ukraine has negatively impacted Arctic security in ways that continue to manifest around the world, from increased energy prices to disruptions in transportation systems and food supplies. At the Department of Defense, we understand the significance of this region, and we aren't standing idly by. Rather, every day, we are taking steps to ensure that our regional interests are being advanced and our homeland protected. I'd like to highlight 3 particular efforts. First, just last year, we established a new office responsible for Arctic and global resilience under the leadership of Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense Iris Ferguson. This new office elevates the importance of the Arctic and provides a focal point for clear, coherent guidance on Arctic issues for the department. Its mission is to lead the department on Arctic by setting priorities, advocating for capabilities, and spurring greater collaboration across DoD components, including the services and the Defense Intelligence Agency, to meet combatant command requirements. Working with the White House, this new team will also be responsible for guiding the department's implementation of the National Strategy for the Arctic region and deepening cooperation with our Arctic allies and partners to develop shared approaches to the challenges we face today. We also will be rewriting DoD's overall Arctic strategy. This updated strategy will fully align with the Biden administration's national security strategy, the 2022 National Defense Strategy, and the National Strategy for the Arctic region to reflect changes in the security environment since the publication of the department's last Arctic strategy in 2019. Second, we are working to deter threats from and through the Arctic by improving early warning and intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance capabilities. And we are doing so with our allies and partners. The department will partner with Canada as it invests 4.9 billion Canadian dollars over the next 6 years to modernize its continental defense capabilities. This includes bolstering Canada's ability to detect threats earlier by modernizing surveillance systems. According to Minister of National Defense Anita Anand, this means construction of a new Northern Approaches surveillance system, including 2 over-the-horizon radars and a network of sensors with various capabilities which will be distributed across northern Canada. Third, we regularly demonstrate interoperable, combat-credible forces with our Arctic allies and partners. For example, last year, U.S. forces participated in the binational Arctic Edge training with Canada in the North American Arctic. Earlier this month, the U.S. Joint Force trained in the European Arctic through our participation in Joint Warrior, a maritime exercise with the United Kingdom, France, Norway, and other NATO allies in the high north above Norway. The department is looking to increasingly expand the scope and complexity of these exercises to build capability and readiness. Thank you once again to today's organizers for inviting me to speak with you. The Arctic is critical to the defense of the U.S. homeland. It's a region that we continue to focus on at the Department of Defense. With that, I'll wrap up my remarks here, and look forward to participating in the armchair dialogue panel to follow. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Ms. Dalton. It is truly an honor to have the Assistant Secretary for Defense in Alaska, in Anchorage, and at the Arctic Encounter. Up next, we're going to have our panel discussion on stage, a topic that I think we all feel is very important, contemporary Northern security for the 21st century. And this is moderated by a good friend and colleague, Miss Libby Casey, who I'd like to welcome up. Libby Casey, for the second year in a row, came to Anchorage to join us as our expert moderator. Libby is a former reporter in Alaska, actually, but currently and for several years now has served as a senior news anchor with the Washington Post. I'd like to ask Libby to join the stage as well as the panelists. Please join us. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much to all of you for being here. Assistant Secretary Dalton, I'd like to start with you since we just learned through your remarks about some of the forward-looking agenda items from the Department of Defense. You know, you mentioned the White House National Strategy for the Arctic region, and it was just released 5 months ago. I know a lot of us are very familiar with it, but the very first pillar is security. And it states, the Arctic environment poses region-specific challenges that require tailored technology, assets, infrastructure, training, and planning. We got some insight on those very specific needs of the Arctic from you a few moments ago, but can you elaborate a little more on what you see as the region's specific challenges and solutions?
Well, thanks so much, and delighted to be joining this distinguished panel today to continue the conversation. Look, the Arctic region is one of growing strategic importance, whether that's the pacing challenge of the People's Republic of China. Although not an Arctic nation, they claim to be one. They are aspirational in that regard. They are clearly making advances in terms of economic investments in the region, in terms of their research and development and science technology investments that may have dual use purposes. But fundamentally, it's part of their agenda to reshape the rules-based international order. That is an agenda that they share with Russia. In that regard, Russia, of course, being a long-time Arctic presence, refurbishing its military infrastructure, its bases as the Arctic is melting, to provide that forward power projection from their northern bases. And then, of course, we have the nexus with climate change, which is at once both opening new opportunities from a security perspective, but also challenges in terms of having the right capabilities to be able to navigate through what is still quite an extreme and austere environment. And so all of these challenges coming together make it an incredibly dynamic security environment. And so quite timely that the administration pulled together the updated national strategy for the Arctic region, has several pillars, as you mentioned, including economic development, a focus on governance, a focus on climate and environmental issues. And then, of course, there's the security pillar, which we are quite focused on in the department, along with our DHS and other colleagues. And so we are quite actively building out the implementation of the NSAR. The development of DoD's Arctic strategy over the next several months will be a great way for us to flesh out the specific alignment of future investment and capabilities that we will need to meet the goals and the objectives of the NSAR. I foresee potential investment in a few ways in the department at a broad level, certainly to enhance our intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance capabilities in the region, to be able to leverage opportunities that we have with our allies and partners that bring tremendous capability to the region. We're very lucky to have such highly capable allies across the Arctic, and that really is the center of gravity for us. But specific to the U.S. military, I foresee us over the near and medium term potentially making investments in communications, which are challenged in these austere environments and extreme latitudes, investments in domain awareness capabilities and sensors, medical support capability, the ability to be able to ensure that, heaven forbid, in a crisis or contingency or just a bad day, that we're able to provide that needed medical support, as well as extreme cold weather survivable ground maneuver forces, I believe will be another area of focus. And finally, being able to sustain our operations in some of these austere locations requires investments in fuel infrastructure, both maritime and aviation. So just to highlight a few of the areas where I see us making investments going forward.
You mentioned partnerships, so I want to go to Brigadier General Radiff with the Royal Canadian Air Force. Welcome. We heard about this investment in the early warning and surveillance. Can you talk a little bit more about other points of collaboration between allies, specifically with the United States?
Well, certainly. So I'm sitting here as a part of NORAD, so the North American Aerospace Defense, and I'm the deputy here in Alaska. And about 60% of the time, I'm actually the person who's defending Alaska, because the General Nahom is usually away or out of town or different conferences for his for the other aspects that he works on. So that gives you a great example of the binational command and how it works. It'll be 65 years this May. We re-signed it again in 2006, the contract between the two governments, and so that's a great piece. I'll go sort of to the focus on the north, really, from what we see as, having flown fighters over the north, starting in 2000. What was, we think of the Arctic Ocean. I now think of the Northwest Passage because it's less ice, more ability to go through. So in my time flying airplanes, was able to see the difference. And as you get there, your domain awareness you need in an environment that is frozen 12 months out of the year is different than you need in an opening Arctic. And so really the collaboration, as ASD Dalton mentioned, is going towards domain awareness. So Canada's investment, the US's investment in the domain awareness, and really working towards that aspect, working towards the purpose-built troops, the purpose-built training for the troops, rather, and purpose-built equipment and infrastructure in order to go forward to get that domain awareness. And that's really where we are collaborating. I'm very encouraged by the Canadian government and the US government's advances in that, and the recognition that we need to get there. Because there are others. I mean, recently Russia announced a $100 billion upgrade to their infrastructure in the north. So things like that, there are others that are doing it, and if we need to get there. So domain awareness would be the contribution to domain awareness would be my big piece.
Vice Admiral Thompson with the U.S. Coast Guard, the saying is the best time to plant a tree is 20 years ago. The second best time to do it is now. I think we all know that there has been a drive to try to get more ice cutters, icebreakers, try to get more of a robust ability for the Coast Guard to do its job here. It takes a very long time. Can you talk to us about your role in maritime governance? Because depending on where you are, if you're an Alaskan, you have a very different view of what the Coast Guard provides to people. What does the future look like?
Yeah, thank you very much, first for the opportunity to be here and for that particular question. I think that's great. I look at it as our value proposition, not only to the United States, but to the world, is maritime governance. When I say maritime governance, I'm really talking about all of the missions that the Coast Guard performs. So everything from maritime security to search and rescue to marine environmental response, think oil spills and those types of things, to humanitarian assistance, disaster relief. I think of all of those things under maritime governance, to govern, to look after the threats that come from the sea, to look after the people that are on the sea each day, and then certainly to look at the sea itself in terms of an environmental piece. I think those are critical to everything that's happening here in the Arctic each and every day. You mentioned icebreaker. So I would say that an icebreaker is just one part of a much larger system. Now, certainly in the national strategy for the Arctic region, one of the strategic objectives in there specifically points out to expand the Coast Guard icebreaker system. There's no doubt about it. And right above that is what I just talked to you about in terms of maritime governance. That is what we have to offer, and that's what we do each and every day with our presence that has been here up in the Arctic region since the mid-1800s. But I would offer one other piece, and I wanted to just jump on this in terms of maritime domain awareness. We're uniquely positioned because of those broad authorities that we have and those broad missions that we conduct. We're able to be a bridge from the Department of Homeland Security to DOD, to Department of State, other U.S. federal agencies, but it doesn't end there. It's to our allies, our partners, as well as tribes, state, and local governments. Getting back to maritime domain awareness, I want to foot stomp this because I think it's very important. In many ways, I would offer that the United States Coast Guard is the face of the federal government here in our Arctic. And I would say that we improve our domain awareness by being and working with the indigenous, the villages, and actually listening to them and understanding how they are being impacted by things like climate change, how they are being impacted by other things that are surrounding them. That is part of the domain awareness, and that's a key part of how we are able to go ahead and provide our form of homeland security throughout this region. So thank you very much for that question. I wanted to foot stomp at a couple of those things, and I appreciate it.
Dr. Hippolyte, speaking of consultation and listening, while you've been here in Alaska representing the Department of Homeland Security, you've been conducting tribal consultations. How important is that when it comes to safety and preparation and coordination?
Thank you so much. And it's just great to be here at Arctic Encounter. Again, this is my second year, and just solely, truly honored to be on this esteemed panel with great colleagues. I'm so glad that the Vice Admiral brought up the aspect of our engagement with the tribal communities. During the week that I've been here, I've had the opportunity to go out to Kotzebue, where we did tribal consultations. So as the Department of Homeland Security is looking at developing its strategy, we're looking at national security as being homeland security, economic security, environmental security, food security, and all those aspects that make up a lot of the aspects of the Department of Homeland Security's very broad mission. And so for us at the department to develop our strategies, it's really important that we get out to the tribal communities to really hear some of the issues that they're having, to understand how we can partner, and to really truly understand that domain awareness. Because any strategy, any policy, any implementation that we would try to do without that engagement would be incomplete. And I think we would be missing out on opportunities. So just wanted to foot stomp that aspect of the tribal consultations, and to say for the department, it was the first time we've been able to get out and do it in person. We started in Kotzebue, but we certainly will be out to other areas because we see it's very important. And in addition to that aspect, I will say as a co-chair of the White House Bering Task Force for the Bering Sea region, co-chair along with NOAA as well as DOI, being able to engage with the Tribal Advisory Council to give us the real insight of the Bering Sea and the issues that's there on a weekly or monthly engagement that we have there has truly been very important for us at the department, because sitting in Washington, D.C., we can have a perception of how things are in Alaska, how things are in the Arctic communities, but until you really get out here and engage and build the trust to have true partnership and engagement, we will really not be able to have the strategies that are needed to truly protect the homeland, which is our very much so important job. So thank you for that question.
Ms. Gail Schubert, we talked about that first pillar of the strategy for the Arctic region being security. The first principle to guide the action on the pillars is to consult, coordinate, and co-manage with Alaska Native tribes and communities. How significant is that prioritization, and what needs to be done to make sure that it is carried out?
First, I'd like to say that I'm a little bit intimidated sitting on this
I am too.
With these really esteemed people up here who
I'm intimidated because you're here, so yeah.
who live, breathe, and just really know everything about domain awareness and that sort of thing. But I was born and raised in Yunlukleet, one of the member villages. And we are a coastal community. And, I remember that we had an Air Force site in Yunlukleet, and it was really very strategic in the region. And we, at this point, we are people who are coastal. We are first responders. A lot of times the equipment that is needed that might deal with an incursion or something else like that. They're not situated in a location where, it would take like 5 or 10 minutes to get to the region. A couple of years ago, I got word from some folks that there were 2 Chinese nationals with someone who lived in the Seattle area flying into my region, specifically Nome, and they were flying in with the intent of buying coastal land on the Bering Strait. And that was land that was for sale by someone who decided that they didn't need to use it for the purpose of mining, which was the original intent. And I did not like that idea, so I contacted the FBI and told them that we really have no interest in having Chinese nationals own land in the region. And I don't know what happened, but they never showed up. And I was told that they were intercepted and sent back to China. So even though I don't have the military expertise and that sort of thing, I do care very much for our country. I do really appreciate the military folks who serve our country and those that are retired as well. And, I'm American, and that's, I have a heart for America. And of course, I'm going to ensure that to the degree that I can, I will do my part to ensure that we continue to be protected and move forward.
So, I am intimidated by you, especially now, since I know you know who to call. What does an increased security force mean, though, for the people, especially in the coastal regions? You know, down in the lower 48, some of us live in Washington, D.C., we watched the incursion into U.S. airspace of the Chinese surveillance balloon, and there was sort of this fascinating conversation happening in Washington about, like, well, what's up there? You know, like, what are they looking at? What could they see? Why don't they just shoot it down? There's nothing up there, as though, you know, Alaska was just this big sort of blank expanse. Talk to us about what it's like to be on the front line of these national conversations, international conversations, and back to the national strategy, what that relationship and conversation has to be like. So it's not just something that is received and sort of done without that consultation and communication.
Well, you know, I think that we have the best military in the world, and you know, we're really fortunate. I think that we have the kind of bases and support, equipment, that sort of thing here in Alaska, and I really believe that we civilians who, you know, maybe we don't have any military experience or anything like that, but we can really be aware of the kinds of things that maybe are happening in the region, in Alaska, anywhere, and notify someone else who maybe can do something about it, or look at it in a different vein as to whether there is a national threat or not. And I really am, I think, blessed to have been, you know, born and raised in a really small village on the northwest coast of Alaska. I also felt like I was really blessed to have had, you know, grown up for a short period of time with a military presence in my village. I know that, you know, the military at the time in Unalakleet not only cared about, you know, national security, they also cared about the fact that, you know, the villages were protected as well. And, you know, another memory I have is we had a really strong flood, and the village was flooded, and the Air Force came down with these really big, huge trucks and loaded up a lot of people from the village and brought them up to the military base so that we could wait out the flood and ensure that, you know, we were protected and everything. I self-evacuated. You know, I was just a little kid, and I climbed on one of those trucks without telling my mom and dad and siblings where I was going. So they ended up going to our North River cabin. And I went up to the Air Force site and watched movies all night, as I recall. But you know, it's those kinds of memories, though, that really left me with a lifelong trust and reliance, if you will, on the military, on the United States, and the fact that the people who serve really do deserve the, you know, the thanks and the recognition.
Admiral Thompson, I want to talk about some of the actions that the Coast Guard is able to do. I mean, you know, you were telling me about a cutter, Kimball, that really just like happened to be in the right place at the right time when it came to an episode of meeting presence with presence. Is that a fair way to describe that encounter? And can you tell us about what it means to sort of be in the right place at the right time?
Well, thanks. I right place in the right time. I'll just state it this way, that
those are my words.
Yeah, we tried to have a large Coast Guard presence up in this region around the Bering all the time. So we're either covering it with a large cutter, or we're covering it in innovative ways through other ships and or helicopter aircraft. So right place and right time, I would say strategically placed at the right time, moving forward. So in the last couple of years, what we have seen is about 2 years ago we saw a PRC warship surface action group operating in the Arctic regions in our U.S. EEZ. Last summer, what we saw was now we have PRC vessels and warship vessels and Russian warship vessels working together in a task force in our exclusive economic zone, our sovereign waters. So what we try to do in the Coast Guard through the great work of our District 17 that's here in Alaska and Juneau is we try to meet presence with presence. And we do that to kind of say, hey, we know you're here. We know you're in these waters. Can you be here? You can be here, but we're watching and making sure you're not doing anything that's out of the ordinary. And we did that 2 years ago. We did that last summer, not only with a vessel, but also an aircraft to do that. And I'm anticipating that it will probably happen again as these folks continue to encroach in this region. And then I don't know what they're up to, but I'm concerned about that. Concerned about that a lot. I think we heard earlier about Arctic militarization by Russia recapitalizing their military bases. And I think everybody here has probably heard, China calling themselves a near Arctic nation. So you put one and one together, and you can probably figure this out as I do. But we're going to continue to meet presence with presence out there on the water. That's just one thing that they do. That ship that's here, that 1.0 presence, they're here for search and rescue. They're here to enforce fisheries regulations. They're here to respond in case something else happens, maybe like a typhoon, maybe like a Merbach or something like that occurs. So they're here for all of those purposes. And the thing is, when you're meeting presence with presence, you're usually shadowing those vessels. It could be for a while. That typically means, in my mind, that what about all those other missions that might not be attended to? So it does come at a cost, but we make risk-based decisions all the time. And most of the time, we've been able to mitigate those situations through the use of other assets. So thank you very much for that question.
Secretary Dalton, did you want to follow up on anything related to those growing incursions and the need for monitoring and surveillance?
I think it absolutely underscores the value that our Coast Guard colleagues bring to the equation here in providing that day-to-day presence and domain awareness, and DoD working with our allies to build out that approach with the capabilities that we talked about earlier, making those concerted investments over the next 5 to 10 years, as the Arctic continues to change and open up, is absolutely critical. But we're grateful for a strong partnership with the Coast Guard and with Maine DHS in that regard.
Can you talk more about climate change and what that means for everything from existing infrastructure to thinking about, as you've talked about, opening up channels, but what that means about having to think faster, more forward, and in a changing environment?
Absolutely. So, clearly there's a nexus with this advent of strategic competition because it's opening up avenues of approach for both the PRC and Russia to be able to navigate through the high north. It is also presenting challenges for our own infrastructure and capabilities here in Alaska. I mentioned earlier one of the core focuses of my team is what we call mission assurance, the ability for us to ensure that we can project power forward from the critical installations that we have here in Alaska. So we're bringing a climate lens to that work to ensure that over the next decade we can be resilient to a changing climate, whether it comes to snow removal from our runways, so that our aircraft that are constantly on alert are ready to perform those missions, or if the balloon goes up, and we find ourselves in an Indo-Pacific fight, that our F-35s are ready to go, to renewable energy sources that are going to allow us to transition from some of the reliance on energy sources that are not as climate friendly, but also frankly are more operationally resilient as well. When we talk about operating in the high north, being able to rely on those renewable energy sources is going to be critical because of how hard it is to get fuel to some of these remote locations. So these are some of the lines of effort that we are thinking and planning along.
General Radif, what do you see as some of the changing challenges, as we just heard Secretary Dalton talk about?
Well, the climate change aspect obviously is the biggest challenge because we're facing infrastructure issues that we've never had before. Runways that were built on permafrost that's no longer permafrost, right? Buildings that were built on permafrost that's now thawing. We're seeing our long-range radar sites that were built on the coast for a reason. Now that coast is eroding away in front of them. So those are the really big pieces with that. But I would say from a challenge, the question you had earlier for me was about collaboration. And I'd say the collaboration I failed to mention that probably is the most important is the collaboration between Russia and China with their bomber fleet, Russia and China with their navy. That is actually the concern. So that is what the concern is for us, and that drives everything we need to do from a security perspective. So that's really what I would say is the piece for that.
You're getting a big head nod from Admiral Thompson. Yeah. Dr. Hippolyte, before we wrap this up, I'd like to learn more about what you've been hearing as you've been in this process of talking to people in Alaska. I know that something that you are looking at is the impact of climate change to communities as an aspect of community resilience.
Absolutely. And I think the heart of what we were hearing when we were out, whether we were here in Anchorage, in Kotzebue, or just part of the Bering Task Force, is the resiliency piece and how it's happening. The impact of climate change is happening rapidly, whether it's from a fisheries perspective, whether it's from storms, that Typhoon Merbak, and the consistent storms that's being faced in this region, and the impact it's having. The one concept that we're having is really trying to focus on resiliency. In order for us to really do that from a department perspective, it's really important for us to really understand through science and indigenous knowledge, and taking those two pieces and really informing us in terms of where we need to have our manpower, how we need to work with organizations like FEMA to ensure that we're here and we can surge up is very important. And just the last piece that I will say for that is just truly just engaging with the tribal community and having an understanding, because really they are our first line of defense. They see things and they hear things that we would not be able to understand or see. And without that input, it will be very difficult for us to surge up in times of needed. So right now we're preparing, and we're hoping to make sure that that's part of a lot of our strategic approaches in the region.
All right. Thank you so much to all of you. We're out of time. I really appreciate hearing from all of you on your perspectives. Thank you.